But before I get into that, I think the most basic question is why should there be another book on strategic planning? There's a lot out there on strategic planning, and it's planning has been around for a long time, and it's sort of been sort of at the beginning of history. Military organizations had to plan, and it was really after World War II when planning became more acceptable in the public sector, so in the private sector. So it was organizations like GE really led the way in terms of planning. And then when was it, about 1965, I think, a guy by the name of Assoff wrote a book called Corporate Planning. And that was the first formal writing in terms of organizations need to plan in order to be successful. But it wasn't until the 70s when Drucker came along and started writing, when he formalized the term mission. So, what is your organization about? And then in the 80s, Michael Porter started talking about strategic differentiation. So it's only around the turn of the century when we've come up with the traditional form of what a strategic plan looks like. But still, that's 26 years ago. And I've been feeling, over my 20 years of consulting that there's something more that needs to happen in terms of planning, or something different needs to happen in terms of planning. And right now, at this moment, the most important part that I can identify is that the traditional 3-year plan or 5-year plan or 10-year plan doesn't have as much weight as it used to. So it was before we were planning for contingencies, we were planning for a vision of that future that might be 5 or 10 years out. And there was fair amount of certainty in terms of if you continued down this path, you would be able to get there. But in today's world, you've heard of VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty. I forget the C right now. Change,
Complexity.
complexity, yeah, and
Yes.
ambiguity, right? Exactly. So that is the world we're living in. So it's really hard to plan very far ahead. But on the other hand, the whole aspect of planning is something that can improve flexibility. So it's quite the opposite of what people say. Well, a plan's no good anymore because it's too static, it's too stable. But the opposite is true. If you have this, what business are we in today? What is it that we want to accomplish? Where is it that we're going? If that's in your mind, it's kind of the North Star of planning and where you want to go. So to me now, strategic planning is more about how do I document as the head of the organization, or if you're a consultant advising a head of an organization, how do I understand what it is that I need to achieve? What is my fundamental purpose as an organization? And then how do I ensure that I've got flex, I've got the right resources, I can move back and forth, and I have flexibility to move forward. So the plan now becomes more of a discussion document, or a way of setting context for the entire organization about, what we're all about inside the organization. So the purpose, that's a long story to get to the purpose of my book, is really to provide more of a guide. So what are the key elements of planning that should be written down? What is the key kind of thinking that a head of an organization needs to have? And then most importantly, what kind of process do you have in place so that people throughout the organization are able to focus in on the right work at the right time, and making sure that they're resourced to be able to do that. So with that in mind, I'd like to walk you through the slides. It's roughly in the order of the PDF that I gave to you, so you'll be able to follow along. Any questions about that so far?
None
Okay,
from me.
excellent.
So
Let's
far,
jump
so
in.
good.
So feel free to jump in with a question at any time that you have one, because we will be informal here. So welcome. This is me. And the book is called When Strategy Doesn't Deliver. So really, I'd like to start maybe just a quick reflection from you in terms of Brian, your experience, or Adair, your experience from the perspective of clients. Is strategy clear in the leader's mind? But if it is clear in the leader's mind, is it equally clear to managers? And is it, in your experience, consistently translated into execution? So Adair, why don't we start with you? What are your thoughts around that, just to share with us?
Okay, Dwight, I think that's a fantastic a way to start the conversation. For me, I think I've been privileged to meet leaders who are actually clear on what they want on what they
Hmm.
expect and where they are going, in terms of, like you rightly said, the vision, the mission, and of course, the intended outcome of whatever they intend, what they have taught to do in the business. So for me, it's clear. But the question now is, I think where the gap usually comes in is probably in the area of communication,
Hmm.
effectively cascading the intentions to the managers that will help drive and achieve these intentions. So
Hmm.
I think that's where the issue is, because it's a trickle down effect at the end of the day. If what you have in mind is not effectively translated, then it may become a big problem
Yep.
for effective implementation. So I think that's always where I see clients sometimes have issues. They have a clear strategy, they have it in mind,
Okay.
but now it's about making sure that everybody's carried along to get the desired result. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I think you're going to like this tool then. Brian, what thoughts have you got for us?
Well, as you aware, Dwight, I've got a little movie playing in my mind about how it is that we service our customers and, driving the process. And I've articulated that and continue to articulate that as I'm pivoting our project lifecycle and how that implements our ERP software and all of the stages of that. So some people are getting it and they really are nodding their head and saying yes. But that continuous communication there, as you said, is the challenge. And
Hmm.
then when you have some legacy people that are, or some new people, then for me, the legacy ones and is the challenge where, well, you've changed like 8 times. What's going to be different this time? So, um, you know, that is going to be the challenge. So I'm at a good I'm restructuring a lot of things in preparation for an exit strategy, working with BDC on that, and we're I'm jumping back into more of some of the managers role, but also trying to play at the CEO level and creating some some clarity and expectations and accountability around those managers.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for that introduction and for sharing that information. Um, so what I'd like to do now in the first section is just talk a little bit at a very high level about strategy and just kind of talk about a few of the bullet points that I think we need to keep top of mind. And the first point is that strategy often exists in the head of the leader. Dare, as you pointed out, and Brian, as I know, you know you know what your strategy is. You know where your company expects to be, or where you
They
expect.
can't read my mind. I don't understand.
Um, the key issue is that the growth of an organization does create fragmentation because as the organization grows, that vision that's in the owner's mind is not as translatable to all the people. In a smaller organization, you can keep your arms around everyone. Everybody knows you, you know everyone, you have coffee together, and they know what their job is relative to where you're taking the company. As it grows, it's not that simple. So really, it requires some more process around how we can execute against that strategy or execute against that vision of what you want the company to be. So in the book, then I start to make differentiation. So the first part is strategy, which is a deliberate choice about changes that we need to make over time to arrive at some future state, however far in the future that is, and operations, which are running the business today, and really about that current state efficiency. So both are important, but they're different, and we have to think about them in different ways. The second one is around accountability, which is the delegated accountability for someone achieving specific outcomes versus activity, which is kind of the motion and task completion. I often talk about that as churn inside the organization. Everybody's very busy, but with the lack of proper context, they're busy doing what they think is important, but it may not be what's most important for the organization. So it creates a huge expenditure of energy, but not necessarily energy that should be spent in the way it's being spent. And then the
Right, and just to
Mhm.
jump in on that, Dwight,
Yep.
and sorry if I have a meeting with Dwight this afternoon because he's also my peer network
Oh,
facilitator.
that's
But
fantastic.
um, the for me, we have people having meetings. We were using Traction in the US, and we have an ERP software, and we have an engineering design CAD CAM software. So um, too much of um, these systems were being the purpose and not being used as a tool. So berserk amount of activity that was not adding value to my end client.
I think that's a good point, and that can become part of churn as well because people get tied up in a particular process or a particular activity, not realizing that it's not the best way to do things anymore. And then the third point is the difference between value-added planning and delegated work. So delegated work is fairly well understood in organizations, but the concept of value-added work. So what is the work that only the person in that role with their problem-solving capability and their resources are going to be able to accomplish? So it's thinking about
Mm.
how do I right-size work as I send it down the road, down layers in the organization so that they can be successful at doing that work.
Right. And for me, doing the work that I can delegate
Yeah.
is problematic when I don't like the results I've got and taking the time to coach and manage them as I do that. So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
been even today I'm starting just being more aware of what you're saying and doing.
Yep, exactly. And that type of activity takes away from you focusing in on your value added work because then you're doing work that could be delegated at other places if people had the capability and the knowledge to do it.
Mhm.
Um, so Brian, you and I have talked about complexity of work, and Adair, I think you and I have had that conversation as well. So that really does tie into the delegation of work and value-added work. So the head of the organization is working out further. In the traditional sense, we would say it's 5 to 10 years. It may not be 5 to 10 years anymore just because of increasing complexity of our world. But it requires that higher order of problem solving. How do I keep in motion all of these different things in the organization that I'm going to be able to carry forward and keep them balanced? It's less complex at the executive level, less complex at the director level, and then even less complex at the front line where people come in, they're delegated their work, they know what it is, they come in the morning, they do their work, and they go home at night. So the difference in complexity between the front line and the head of the organization is great. So thinking
Yeah,
about
and
how we break up
and
those levels becomes important. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
our times are much different than that. So just the front line, some of them are depending what role they're in, but if they're on the factory floor, what am I doing when I get to work? And as long as I know for the next few hours, I'm happy. So
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So then we really do make that differentiation between strategy and operations in terms of where is it that we want to go and what do we need to run efficiently within our organization. And ironically, one of the things in strategy might be to ensure that we're working more efficiently. We call it polishing the diamond. So if our process is in place, how do we make sure that we're working as well as possible so that we can be more competitive? So the next point I wanted to make is that strategic planning really does belong at the head of the organization. So it's in chapter 4 in my CEO book, I do talk about planning. So I believe that each manager inside an organization should have a plan, including the head of the organization. And the head of the organization's plan is, in fact, the strategy for the whole organization. It may begin implicitly, so it may be something that the owner knows and is doing, and people understand it that sort of implicitly or by osmosis, by example. But as the organization grows, it has to become more and more explicit. And I referred to those next points in a bit in my earlier comments. So here you have it on one slide. So why the strategic plan matters, because it is that North Star, which kind of gives you, as the owner of the organization, where is it that I'm going? And that gives a guide. I think of it as a razor. It's a razor that enables you to make decisions. Should we do this or should we do this? Well, if this is my North Star, it makes sense that we would be putting our resources moving in this direction. Most people see a strategy as more of a sponge. So put all of your objectives in there and then document them and try to figure out what your strategic goals are to accomplish all of that, when in fact, no organization can be everyone to everything. So that thinking and that documentation of what is our primary purpose and our primary vision becomes really important. Once that's in place, it provides context for delegation, because if the head of the organization is really clear about what's important for the organization in terms of success, that provides context and being able to explain it. And this is one reason why a documented strategic plan, in whatever form and however simple it may be, provides a lot of guidance and help to the owner, because it becomes a type of context that you can set for everyone in the organization. And in spite of what people say that planning creates rigidity, I believe that a proper plan will in fact enable flexibility, because if you understand where you want to go, you understand what your resources are, you're much better able to make trade-offs in the short term than if you don't have a handle on those things. And then finally, it supports continuity in decision making. So when it comes right down to it, then in the strategic plan, which I write about in the first, I guess, 1/3 of the book, it's really comes down to those traditional words, those traditional elements: mission, vision, values, strategic positioning, strategic goals, and resources. But the power in doing that is partly in the thinking through of it, but it's partly in the documenting of that strategic plan, because in the process of working it through, thinking about it, jotting notes, writing down what your vision is for that, it helps you as the owner, or you as the consultant advising the owner, to really get a more precise handle on what are the important aspects of my organization that I need to be focused on. And Appendix A in the guide that you have is really a form or a template which can be used in discussion or in thinking with by the owner or with the owner in terms of helping them to do that. So I always start, if I'm doing a planning process with a client, I always start with a few questions, like sort of what business are we really in? The owner can ask, or you can ask the owner. And that's as fundamental as what do we make and to whom do we sell it? It's that's kind of the most fundamental business case. And if you think about things in that simple terms, then it can really help cut away a lot of the fluff. What does the future that we're committed to look like? And thinking about that and talking about it. And then, if we want to arrive at that future that we're thinking about, what are the trade-offs that we need to make? What are we not going to be able to do if we want to achieve those things that I think are important? And then finally, as the owner, what are the outcomes that I am personally accountable for? And that's the identification of the value added work for the owner, because if the owner can identify that work, which only the owner can do, then that creates the baseline for the direction of the strategic plan and where they personally need to dedicate their time. That helps to inform delegation and helps to really improve the way in which they look at others. And to your point earlier, Brian, even though you might get drawn into the weeds, knowing that value-added work is there and needs attention can help you keep your focus on that North Star.
Yeah, and as you're walking through that, I mean, I've done all of that stuff using the traction model, but it's the same thing. And or even if I think of the OKRs, John Drucker's the Google story approach to this stuff, where I fell down was then in, when we started getting down into the next level, my managers just lost focus and started, you know, I
Hmm.
wasn't able to hold them accountable for what was important.
Hmm. Adair, what's your experience with OKRs and sort of delegated work and objectives in terms of owners having a handle on that?
Okay, for me, from my perspective as a QHSC consultant, it's actually strategies is a top priority foundation for the standards. You understand? Because you are guiding them not only to meet requirements of standard, but to go beyond meeting the expectations. You understand? So in that case, it means that like you rightly said, the strategic plan is vitally important. And then from there, you can cascade all those requirements. And that's why going back to the standard, for all the management system standards, you need to clearly understand your context as an
Hmm.
organization. So what are those things, those issues that can affect your ability to achieve your intended outcome?
Hmm.
Customers or to any interested stakeholder. So when you have a clear understanding of that, that will help you, like you rightly said, Dwight, to develop or to come up with the objectives that are relevant. Because it
Hmm.
is at the end of the day, when you don't have objectives that are relevant, you will find it hard to actually eventually get the value added results that you were looking out for. So it's all about making sure that the objectives you even set become relevant and then you cascade. It's all about communication at the end of the day, like I rightly
Right,
said.
right. Yeah.
People need to know what their responsibilities are and they have to be accountable to achieve that.
Hmm.
With that, you are on a strong footing to achieve your desired result. Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. So that's from both of you, that's a wonderful segue to the next section, which is really about the value-added plan itself. So I know Adair, this is the tool that you're waiting for me to start talking about. So so the purpose of the value-added plan is really how do I, as the head of the organization, take these strategic goals and through some kind of a process, which I call value-added planning, arrive at strategy implementation. And the key to it, and I couldn't underline your statement more, Adair, it is really about communication. Planning is a living discipline, and it cannot be a one-way top-down instruction. Often delegation
Mm.
of deliverables and OKRs happen to be sort of one way, top down. But by having a process like the value added plan, you can create this deliberate, disciplined
Mm.
iteration between the manager and the team members. And one element of that is milestones, and I like to think of milestones in a way that is a bit different from a lot of others. And I think it does provide help in thinking about how we keep this communication going down the organization and back up. So first of all, milestones, we all know this one. They define meaningful progress. So it's a way of us at the head of the organization figuring out what's going on and what's happening. They create that point for review, but they also prepare us for cascading execution. So what I mean by that is this, I drew a little picture here. So the final milestone represents completion. So if I'm head of an organization and I'm at level 4, that means I've got directors reporting to me, they've got managers, and then there's frontline employees. So at level 4, I might have something that I want to accomplish in the next 3 years. And then I've got 2 milestones of how I want to do, what I need to do to be able to get there. That last milestone, the last milestone is actually very closely related to a delegation to someone at the next level down. So, in other
Mm.
words, for me to accomplish my outcome, I'm not going to do it on my own. I'm going to need support from my directors for level 4, and I will be delegating work to different directors and specific outcomes that if they achieve that, I can integrate those. That becomes my milestone, and then I'm prepared to move on to the actual final outcome that I have. So if we map it out in a more formal way, you have value-added planning for a level 4 organization. I have a strategic outcome, again, example 3 years from now, and I've got 2 milestones to get there. In my meeting with my directors, then I talk with them about the delegated director the deliverables that I need in the next 1 to 2 years that are going to contribute to me achieving my strategic outcomes in the organization. And then they will have milestones. And then I will hold them accountable for having the same kinds of meetings I've been having with them that they would have with their frontline managers. So they're now delegating in a shorter time frame. They're chunking their deliverables out and creating work that is right sized for the role. And then finally, the frontline workers get their day-to-day work and they deliver on that. So questions about that? That's probably the most intense slide I have today.
For me, this
It,
is
you know,
fantastic. I
it
think
makes
it's
perfect
very,
sense.
yeah, makes sense. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I'm just saying you know, the slide is very simple and okay, you do blah blah blah, and but
Hmm.
what are the um, planning those strategically, thinking about that, and that's certainly where my company has fallen down, where I've got this overall outcome where I want to get, but then some of the issues that are created as you go down don't get resolved uh, satisfactorily enough, and then it just the whole thing stagnates, or uh,
Mhm.
you know, you get unimpressive results as it goes up.
Mhm. Adair?
Okay, I think for me, it's a fantastic overview of how you can go about a very effective value-added planning, and this is very fantastic. In fact, I pick a lot from this, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
It's all about, like you rightly said, setting the milestone and having checks at various
Mhm.
points to see to what extent you are achieving what has been defined to be achieved. So I think it's a good one. Like rightly said, I think one of the should I say one of the key skills that any management consultant will have that separates him from any other person is how effectively they can communicate and
Mhm.
support
Yeah.
management to ensure that this plan is effectively implemented and executed. Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. Yeah. So Appendix D has versions of this for level 3 and level 5 organizations as well. So then the value-added plan is intended to be a structured definition of how a manager adds value to strategy at each level in the organization. And it gets away from the task list or the project plan or the performance appraisal tool. It's none of those things. It's really how do I implement ongoing communication in a way that's going to be helpful. And part of that is in the discussion. The delegation is a discussion, is what I want to say. And these are the 4 areas that must be included in the discussion, and it needs to be a two-way discussion. So what is the quality of what I want you to deliver within that time frame? What is the quantity I want you to deliver? By when do I want you to deliver it? And what are the check-in points to get there? And then this most important one, and as a manager myself and head of organization myself, this is often where I fell down, is what are the resources that you need for it? And this is where the two-way communication comes in. And time, unfortunately, is one of those one of those resources that all employees have. So if this is a priority,
Mm.
what else can come off the plate, or how do you arrange all of the various things that I've delegated to you in a way that you're going to be able to focus in on the most important ones? And then, of course, budget and the authority that you need, and IT that you might need, or software, whatever that might be. So the cascading value then is that we're really cascading context as much, not as much as just milestones and the mechanisms for them and the OKRs or whatever those might be, but it is those things, but it's within the context of what we're trying to accomplish and the context of what I expect you to accomplish within your role over time. So those deliverables then are not so much are more than just outcomes. They're accountabilities for delivering something within a certain time frame to the quality and quantity standards that you expect. And this really helps then through that two-way discussion ensure that accountability remains clear at each level. So just one more quick point before we start jumping into the plan itself. So the strategic goal remains constant across all of the levels. So always there's that vision to where the organization overall is going. The issue is that depending on the level of the organization the person is in, they will have a very different view about what that means for them. And if we and also within which function, accounting or operations or sales will also have a different view on what it means for them. So it becomes the goal of middle management, starting with the under the oversight of the head of the organization, is to how do you right size those goals and make them clear within the context of the overall organization's vision on terms of what they need to focus on. So the value added plan is, I think of it as a mini strategic plan because the key concepts are really the same, but they're at the managerial level. I want to underline what it is not. It is not a complex multi-page document. It's really a document. It's in Appendix B. The form is in Appendix B. It's a document which provides that opportunity for a manager, a subordinate of yours, to be able to understand what it is that they need to do. So there is the context, which is the mission, the vision. I like to ask managers to develop their own elevator pitch for their unit. So as the head of this organizational unit, how would you describe your job? And just having that discussion with them can be really, really helpful in terms of ensuring
Mm.
that they've got the same understanding as you do about their job. What are the objectives or the key deliverables that are expected and the timeframes for them? And then there's a section specifically on value-added work where the manager needs to think about what is it that I alone can accomplish in terms of the work that my unit needs to do so that they can get a focus on that. And then finally, the resources, which are a really important part of the two-way discussion. So once we have that, we've really created a discussion cycle or an iterative cycle of planning. So the first step is that the subordinate, your team member, would prepare the initial plan. So Appendix C is the process that a person could follow, details what they would need to do in terms of doing their first draft of their initial plan. And I like to do this because if you, as their boss, their manager, does the first draft, they're not going to be as comfortable challenging it. But if you ask them to do it first, you're going to get an insight into the way they think about their role. And probably 70-80% of it is going to be fine. But the other 20 to 30% become real discussion points. So if there's a real difference of your opinion of what the role does versus what their opinion is of the role, then it provides that opportunity to really clarify context in terms of what your expectations are with regard to their outcomes. So then that
And this
base.
is where I really fall down where because I'm going to delegate phase one, um, and certainly from a more authoritarian type of approach to phase two, and then and then when I get down into the phase three and four, why aren't you doing what I told you? So
Mhm.
the just getting them to draft the plan and then explaining to them, and the first couple of times I can see this being challenging
There you
because
go.
they may look at what you're asking them to do to draft the plan as,
Mhm.
they may look at it completely different than what your vision, what your movie in your brain is having.
Mhm.
So,
Yep. So that sort of brings me to the next point, and you stated it very, very well, Brian. It's sort of planning as a living discipline. So it's how do you ensure and reinforce the importance of those discussions. So it becomes those one-on-one conversations, which over time, it's tough. Always the first time around with anything like this is difficult, but over time they become one-to-one conversations where real issues can be discussed
mm,
because it's in the context of your overall plan and what your expectations are of them. It also creates this ability to delegate with more confidence because if you've been having all of those conversations, your understanding of their role and their perception of it is much clearer. So when you've got something new coming on and you need to delegate it, you know what the impact is going to be with much more confidence than you might have otherwise. And then the reviewing process also becomes easier because it's just much more clear in terms of who does what when with respect to the delegation that you've put in place. So these are the pitfalls. I think we talked about these off and on as we've been going through, but the pitfalls, confusing activity with progress. So the fix is how do we anchor the reviews, the discussions in outcomes and milestones, not an effort. I see this in sales a lot. Effort seems to, you know, the salesperson reports, yeah, I've had so many meetings and I'm really busy and I've developed these PowerPoints, but the sales will come in next quarter, as opposed to what is the actual progress that you're making in the role. Skipping levels in the cascade is often an issue where, the head of the organization, instead of working with the directors directly, will go down to the next level, and that just creates confusion because if you want to hold your team members accountable for the work of others, it's really important that you honor that delegation through each level. Over specifying the work or micromanagement. So how do you delegate outcomes and context and not step-by-step instructions? This is a really, really hard one. In my own life, it's really hard in terms of how do you provide enough context and then delegate accountability for outcomes without stepping in and them perceiving that you're micromanaging them. And it's really, really hard. I know in my own personal life, it becomes a really good example of it is between my wife and I. I'm the first to admit, I'll admit to the two of you that I'm not the best person about procedures, but every time when I pour the soup at lunchtime and I come into the dining room with the bowl of lunch, she says, "Did you turn off the burner?" So yeah, of course I turned off the burner. And she'll ask me 20 times and I start to get annoyed about it, but the 21st time she doesn't ask me and I left the burner on. So, in the workplace, it's that kind of thing too. If you leave people to their own, they will make the mistakes. So where do you find that trade-off? And it's very much a situational thing that we need to deal with in life because people resent being told something that they know that they should be doing. On the other hand, they're often not very good at doing it. So we have to find that diplomatic way of keeping people on track and finding their successes and rewarding those, and then gently reminding them where they're not doing as well.
You're talking through this, Dwight, and several slides back, I was looking at it and you had it from, and I don't want you to go back, but it seemed like something, and my brain right away went to the bottom. So I'm going on that. I'm dealing with the entry level workers and working my way up.
Mhm.
And, absolutely, I am micromanaging the process now. So, but anyway, this is some of those pitfalls. I could be challenged with all of them.
Yeah, and that's human. And then treating planning as a one-time event versus building plan reviews into monthly management rhythms. As a management consultant, I cannot tell you in my 20 years and hundreds of clients how many times I've gone into an organization where they're having trouble with their strategic plan, and they've got two or three strategic plans on the shelf that they've been developing over the years. And so, well, you have plans and they look pretty good. And the answer is, well, yeah, but we're not able to execute them. So we have to come
Yeah.
up with a new plan. And when in fact, you need a process like that, the plan can be 60 or 80%, doesn't have to be perfect. If it's 60 or 80% there, you can get real results by implementing it effectively. And then 6 steps to deploying the value-added plan. So I've just put it out in these 6 steps. And Appendix C delineates this in much more detail. So establishing the strategic plan, which is the head of the organization accountability. The head of the organization defines those outcomes and milestones. And again, with input and with communication and discussion, but it is the accountability and the authority of the head of the organization to do that. It's not building consensus. It's gathering information from those in your organization and other sources external to your organization to come up with what you believe is best for the organization. Then introducing the value-added plan to your immediate subordinates in a team meeting, and then in the one-to-one conversations. Then holding them accountable for cascading it downward within their areas, and then them holding their team members if your organization is that large to cascade it down to the next level. And then to ensure that those value-added plans are integrated into ongoing management. So again, the biggest failing is going through the cycle once and then stopping, because if you do that, then you're just wasting paper or digital space, zeros and ones, whatever it is. You need to have those ongoing discussions. Higher in the organization, it could be quarterly. The frontline manager, it probably needs to be monthly in terms of just keeping things up to date. And then refining and reinforcing both the process and the results more and more regularly. So the result is not more control. So often when, my management consulting practice was around structure and systems, and one of the biggest issues that people would have is saying that it's just too rigid, and organizations are not like that. So I'm not talking about command and control. I'm talking about how do you ensure that there's better alignment and there's better outcomes as opposed to more activity. It's very easy for us to burn our employees out and expect them to keep performing more and more and more. But if we can get them focused in on the right things and keep their focus on that, then our organization can be a lot more successful without burning people out. So the strategy, though, does need to be explicit for it to be executable. In a very small, maybe two-level organization, you've got a whole bunch of people working for you. It doesn't need to be written down because you can execute just with everybody. They're all your direct reports. Maybe even the next level up a bit, but as organizations get more complex, it does need to become complex. So I'll ask you to think about these questions. We'll have a bit of a discussion now as a wrap up. We're coming up on the hour soon. So where do you see the biggest gap between strategy and execution? What part of this feels most relevant to you? And then what questions do you have? While you're thinking about that, I'll just show you at the end of the slides, which I'll send you soon, later today. There are resources. This is a link that you can get to the book. It's available in three forms. So there's the PDF you have, which is available in a Kindle version on Amazon, or an EPUB version. There's also the hard copy of the book, which you can order through Amazon. And then there's an iterative full color version on my website, which is where you can actually write in the PDF version, type in the PDF version, sorry. And then there are a multitude of white papers that are free resources that I have on the website, plus my blogs and other resources you can find there. And then I've got my YouTube videos, which I haven't been keeping as much up to date as I could, but there's hundreds of hours of video support there. And then finally, you can check out my resources tab for other resources available for consultants and for practitioners. So that was the advertisement. So now back to questions. Adair, why don't we start with you? What your overall impressions are, and any questions you might have.
So it's a fantastic session, very insightful. Thank you for this very good session, Dwight. For me, I think the biggest gap between strategy and execution is always in the area of integrating your strategy into your business process. And I'm impressed with the fact that the VAP that you showed us, the 6 steps. Number 5 is one important area that organizations really need to focus on, which is the integration. Because once you don't effectively, yes, 5. When I saw that, I was like, yes, this is exactly what I was thinking about. So you need to really integrate the plan into your business processes. And this is one way for you to get value at the end of the day. When you don't integrate, you begin to see your strategy as a separate activity on its own, not totally aligned with what the day-to-day activities of the business, which is where the issue comes in. What about you, Brian?
So for me, my overall, I have a lot of this plans done. I've got, I know exactly what in my brain where it is, and I've started doing that. And as it goes further down, then for me, it's the accountability, explaining it to if you go to your 6 steps again there, Dwight, that's where, I've got the first few in my brain but moving them, cascading down and even introducing it to what that team looks like, and just creating that value added plan. I know what it looks like at the top end, but cascading it down and making sure that the work is adding value and not just what you talked about earlier, where it was just, okay, we've got to do step 1, 2, 3, and when we have our ERP software and our management, our engineering software, making sure that that's clear so that the end result is not just digital landfill, but is actually adding value to the people on the shop floor. We get paid when we deliver a cabinet, not when we make a fancy picture. There's no value in the picture as it relates to, so that's where we need to streamline some of these parts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that example, Brian, because that captures exactly activity versus results or outcomes, because the activity is, look at this wonderful CAD drawing I did. Isn't this wonderful? I'm so good at my job. But if you forget how that links into everything else that actually becomes a cabinet, then you can get caught up in activity instead of working on the most important part of it.
Yeah.
I'll give you a quick example, and that is I asked one of my drafter engineers we have to get our submittal drawings to get an approval. So that needs to have some value, and it has to look a certain way, and we have guidelines that we try and follow. But then I said, can you give me a drawing to give to the CNC guy and to the guy putting it together? And he spent 4 hours on it. And I said, this is all very pretty, but I don't need a pretty picture. I need this. So I think I got through to him. But if you have 2 people spending twice as long as they need to on something, anyway, we're moving in. I'm moving, I think, in getting an understanding, and this whole thing overwhelms me because I'm very good at coming up with a vision, but as the further down you go, it's not as much of my skill set. But Dwight will hold me accountable, I'm sure of it.
That's right. We're meeting this afternoon.
Dwight is our leader in management consulting, so I'm always happy to learn a lot from him. Yes. Yes.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Adair.
Thank you so much.
Any questions or any closing comments? No.
It's going to be the implementation of it and walking through it, and how do I do that? So we'll talk this afternoon. So this is a wonderful precursor to what I was going to ask you. How do I build that? How do I build a sustainable performance in my team? So.
Right. Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you, and thank you both for being such good sports and participating so openly. I didn't intend it to be such a discussion, but it was wonderful just being able to interact the way we did throughout this. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, and I thought when I didn't know I was going to have the time to do it, and so I put it in my schedule. I thought, well, I'm going to jump in and see how it goes. So then I was glad I did, for 2 reasons. One, I'd like to support what you're doing, Dwight. I'm sure this is good for you to just go through this process. And then secondly, it gave us it was very interactive. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a great rest of your day. Dwight.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Brian. All right, bye. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, bye.